Speaking first, tonight we have Christopher Long. Christopher is a first-year student reading law at Trinity College. He won the slot through open audition. Christopher, the floor is yours.
Good evening. I would like to start tonight's debate with the words of Wilfred Owen. The old lie, dulce et decorum est pro patria mori. The old lie, it is sweet and fitting to die for one's country. As Owen sat shivering in a sandbagged shell crater on the Western Front, he came to see the futility of war. For me, this is what Remembrance and the Poppy should stand for. It should stand for a rejection of militarism and violence. It should stand as a reminder to us that war is never glorious and always tragic, even if fought for a good cause. And it should stand as a symbol of the torment experienced by all peoples affected by war. Sadly, ladies and gentlemen of this esteemed house, it does not stand for those things. From the beginning, the poppy has been a political and a highly problematic symbol. Firstly, it was founded by Field Marshal Haig, who had a high level of personal responsibility for the month-long tragedy of the Battle of the Somme. Secondly, it has ignored the checkered history of our armed forces as colonial suppressors and instigators of war crimes. Thirdly, it does not address the suffering which war causes to civilians. Fourthly, it is being used by the establishment to glorify war and normalise its place in our society. Finally, although the money raised by the Poppy Appeal does unquestionable good for veterans, to my mind, it is preposterous that 102 years on from the promise that we would build a country fit for heroes, that veterans are still reliant on the charity sector to support them, rather than the government would send them away to risk life and limb. I would like to make it crystal clear, now that I have summed up my argument, that I am a fervent believer in the importance of remembrance and in recognising the substantial contribution of our veterans. However, it must be done in a way which reflects the complexities of war and our involvement with it. The Poppy does not do this. So, to return to the first part of my argument, the historical complexities with the Poppy. Instrumental to setting up the first Poppy Appeal was Lord Haig. So much so, it was originally known as the Haig Fund. To Owen and his comrades, slowly walking across the Somme, being massacred in their thousands, the irony of Butcher Haig leading a remembrance charity, I imagine would have been too great. From the outset, the Poppy is associated with one of history's most controversial figures. Not the lions like Owen, but one of the so-called donkeys that led them to their violent and early graves. From this controversial political beginning, we must consider how the Poppy has never addressed the problematic parts of our armed forces history. It is important to flag at this point that the Royal British Legion specifically note that the Poppy is about remembrance since World War I. Yet, this still includes some horrifying incidences of war crimes and colonial violence, which are certainly not remembered. What about colonial atrocities? For example, the infamous 1948 Butang Kali massacre in Malaya, where 24 unarmed Malaysians were executed by the British Army, or the 1953 Chuka massacre in Kenya, where the British Army executed 20 unarmed civilians. By wearing the Poppy, we are supposed to be remembering those who have fought for our freedom. But surely it is just plain dishonest of us to have this blinkered approach, which ignores the great injustices perpetrated by some members of our armed forces. What about war crimes? For example, the 1972 Bloody Sunday massacre, where British soldiers killed 26 unarmed civilians during a protest march. Where does that fit into our remembrance tradition? The truth is, it doesn't. They don't fit in with the story of our armed forces that the poppy is trying to mythologise. Although it is important to state that the war crimes mentioned above are isolated incidents which are not reflective of the overall good conduct of the vast majority of our armed forces. Yet, by failing to address them, the poppy can be perceived as a symbol which only recognises the glory of our military. Take the Irish footballer James McLean. He has repeatedly refused to wear the poppy due to its association with the sometimes brutal and illegal acts perpetrated by the British Army during the Troubles. If instead we address the complexities behind our behaviour in war, then the poppy need not be such an uncomfortable image for some to wear. A far more poignant remembrance tradition would be one where we really evaluate all aspects of the role of our armed forces, instead of merely continuing to play the old hits of the tragedy of World War I and the triumph of World War II. Perhaps we should take time to reflect on the complex, and although in some parts virtuous, in other parts ignoble and dishonourable role of our armed forces in history. Let us not be suckered in by the old lie. More broadly than merely ignoring our checkered past, the poppy does not take into account the suffering of many more millions of civilians. It is purely about remembering members of the British Armed Forces. Perhaps if we remembered those shocking images of the destruction of Dresden or the bombed out buildings of Baghdad, and we thought about the plight of the civilians caught in the crossfire, having to live in a war zone, and perhaps being made refugees, then we may think twice about going to war, unless it is truly to prevent a greater evil. Every 11th November, when all of the members of the establishment line up with their poppies at the cenotaph and hear the military bands play and the guns fire, we are subconsciously fed images which glorify war, which sanitize war, which normalize war. This was recognised by the 92-year-old veteran Harry Leslie Smith, who believes that the spirit of my generation has been hijacked by latter-day politicians trying to sell dubious wars. This is why Harry does not wear a poppy. There was disquiet among those who had lost loved ones in the Iraq War when Tony Blair went to the unveiling of the new memorial. There should be. The man who, according to the Chilcot report, went to war before it was the last resort, should have the decency not to place himself alongside the imagery of remembrance when he sacrificed service personnel's lives for reasons which the Chilcot report called unclear. Let us not be suckered in again by the old lie. Finally, if we really cared about our veterans, we would do more than just wear a bit of card and plastic for half a month each year. We would elect representatives who would truly put veterans at the forefront of social policy. While the Poppy Appeal does undoubted good through its charity work, government should be at the vanguard of dealing with the unique issues faced by veterans. It appalls me that there are still 6,000 homeless veterans in the UK. Those who risk life and limb on behalf of our country should not then lose home security and employment prospects when they come home. This is a matter for government to prioritise. And it is a true indictment that although they may wear the poppy, they will not deal with the substantive issues facing veterans today. The old lie that it is glorious to die for one's country. We need a symbol which is not burdened with a difficult history. We need a symbol which does not ignore Britain's colonial atrocities and war crimes. We need a symbol untarnished by political figures trying to sell their wars. And we need a symbol which recognises all those who have suffered from that most terrible of human acts, war. As I hope I've explained tonight, the poppy does not do those things. If we as a house truly care about veterans, truly care about all victims of war, and truly want to reject the old lie, then we must also reject the poppy. On these grounds, I urge the House most strongly to vote in favour of the proposition. We should not wear a poppy. Thank you.